let's go back 100 years to what the world looked like around 1915 or 1916. Eiffel Tower was the tallest structure in the world. It's definitely not anymore. The idea of a teenager, like the word teenager, had not yet come into common parlance. Beer in a can did not exist. In 1915, the average life expectancy of a male was 48 years, and of a woman was 51. Congratulations, you've all outlived your most of you have outlived your 1916 counterparts. But we don't even need to go back 100 years, right, to see how the world has changed. Like, I think about how the world has changed in the last 30 years since I've been alive. Like, I remember when I was a kid, there was just these new things called computers that were, like, my dad bought one, and it was like little green characters on a screen that you typed in commands, right? And now the internet is in our pocket with, like, a fount of knowledge. Like, this thing is way more powerful than any kind of computing that we sent to the moon. Sometimes we think that change affects the whole world, and the one place it shouldn't happen is at church. That, while all the world changes around us, the church is the one thing that will not change. But how we are wrong. In 1915, 1916, the United Church was just an idea. There was 3 different denominations who had begun talks about maybe merging together, but it did not exist. And there used to be these little things, some of you may know what I'm talking about, these little communion tokens that elders of the church would bring around to you if you were a good standing member of the congregation. And they would give you one if you'd, given enough money or been to church enough times. They would give you these tokens, and only if you had this token could you receive communion. Right? We've changed a little bit. Or public address systems, the fact that my sound is coming out of these speakers. These things the idea of a microphone was just coming into existence. They were like, it was the big deal at the world fairs of the time that there could be a public address system. And now we can't imagine church without them. We can't imagine our world without some sort of amplification. When I read the stories in the scriptures, I see people changing all over the place. Like when we open up our scriptures and we look at the story of Abraham, it's about this person who was comfortable and then was called out of their place of comfort to a new land. I think of Moses. He was born into a family, put in a reed basket, sent down the river, raised in an Egyptian home for 40 years, then 40 years out tending sheep, and then he becomes this great leader of an exodus. When we open the scriptures, we don't read, here is the story of Moses, a man who stayed the same his whole life, and he was happy, the end. Or, here is the story of Jesus. He was born into a woman and a man named Mary and Joseph. He became a rabbi in a church, and he was happy there for 50 years, and he died, and everyone was sad. Like, he grows up in this town. He goes all over the place. He teaches these incredible things, and he transforms the world. It's never about this. It's never about being constant or being the same. It's about change. And if most of us look back on our lives, we will also see that we have changed and the world has changed. Could it be that the God we sing of and the God we think of and the God we pray to is a God who is not letting us stay stagnant or wanting us to be constant, but rather working through us for change? For change and transformation. Now, there's one caveat here, which is There's change that's good, and there's change that is not good, right? If we look in the stories, for example, we see the story of Saul and David and Solomon, who all do these wonderful things, and then they all have their fall from grace. There's this change and transformation in their lives that is not good. I think that God is working in the change that makes for a more just world, for a more loving people, and for a sense of hope and peace that might rise up. I think that's the work of God in the world. And Rini read two stories for us today. One is a story of Jacob and Esau, and the other is of either the persistent widow or the unjust judge. You can decide. The story for today with Jacob and Esau is one where Jacob wrestles with God, but it's couched in this wonderful story of these two brothers. So let me give you a little bit of background. First, there was Abraham. Abraham's son was Isaac, and Isaac had twin boys. Esau was born first, and Jacob was born next. But you might have heard this story. When Esau is born, Jacob is so close behind that he's said to be grabbing the ankle of Esau as he comes out of the womb. There's like this competition right from the beginning. And these two brothers grow up side by side, and Esau is kind of painted as this wild man. He's got a hairy chest, and he goes out hunting. And Jacob, he stays at home, and he helps his mother around the house. Now, for these boys, they grow up in a culture where one of the most important things you can have is a birthright, the birthright blessing that you're given. And this blessing is going to go to Esau because he was the first one out. Even though Jacob is close behind, Esau is going to get this blessing. And so when Isaac realizes that his time is coming to an end, he calls Esau in. He's blind at this point. He can't see anything. He's kind of frail. You imagine him lying on a bed. And he says to Esau, I want you to go out and hunt something. Bring it back, and we'll make a feast. At the end of the feast, I will give you this blessing, this blessing that comes to the firstborn. So Esau heads out, and I can only imagine he's on this hunt, and it's this really wonderful time. In the meantime, Jacob is at home, and his mother has heard this conversation. And she says to Jacob, Jacob, go kill a goat, and we're going to make a feast. So he goes, and he kills a goat, and he makes a feast, and he brings it to his father. And his father says, wow, that was really fast. And Jacob says, well, I guess God must have been in the hunt with me. And so he makes this feast for his father. But he's a little confused because Isaac hears the voice of Jacob. But when he reaches out to touch his son, he touches a hairy chest. And that's because Jacob has put on a goat skin to make him feel hairy. And so Isaac's kind of confused, but he gives the blessing anyway. He gives it to Jacob instead of Esau. He steals his brother's birthright. And Esau comes back. And imagine what Esau is thinking and feeling. He's so angry, he immediately plots revenge. I am going to kill my brother. And then these two brothers don't see each other for a long time. When you hear that story of Jacob, what kind of character is getting painted? He's kind of conniving. He's mean. He's a thief. He steals this thing that's so important to his brother. Now, there's a good chunk of time that passes before these brothers meet again. These two brothers are said they become very wealthy. They have lots of ducks and livestock and servants and wives, and they become very wealthy. And they meet each other, or their servants meet each other on the road. And they come back to Jacob, and Jacob says, and they say, Esau and his 400 men are close. And Jacob's heart starts pounding. Oh my goodness, what is going to happen if I see my brother again? So he goes into survival mode. First, he divides his camp into two. He takes half of what he owns, and he says, you go that way, and we're going to go this way. And if Jacob attacks you, or Esau attacks you, then, well, we're still going to be alive over here. And if he attacks us, well, then you're still going to be alive over there. We have a backup plan. And then he starts sending out gifts to Esau. He takes a servant, and he gives him a whole flock of geese. And he says, here, just walk up the road, herd these geese ahead of you, and you're probably going to run into Esau. And when you run into Esau, tell him that you're a gift. You as the servant and these geese are a gift for Esau. And then he sends out another servant with a herd of goats. And then he sends out another servant with a herd of sheep. And so all these sheep and livestock are getting sent down the road as gifts. It's I am so sorry. And then all that's left from all this wealth is Jacob, his sons, and his wives. So all this camp and all these servants have gone away, and it's just him. And he crosses this river, and in the middle of the night, he wrestles with God. And just as the sun is about to break, this man who is also God here, this wrestling figure, says, let go of me. It is almost sunrise. And Jacob says, I will not let go of you until you bless me, which is an interesting thing to say for this man who has already stolen one blessing. And the man says, what is your name? And he says, my name is Jacob. And this man says, your name is Jacob no longer, you are now Israel. And then the man touches Jacob's hip joint, and it falls out of place, and he goes limping away. The next morning, he meets his brother. His brother says, What is all this stuff that you sent? What are all these geese and these sheep and these goats that you sent? He says, I don't care. I love you. He takes his brother and he embraces him. Jacob goes from this man who's stealing blessings to a man who becomes the birth of a nation, right? He becomes the father of Israel. The next story we have is one of the persistent widow. Now, to understand this story, we need to understand the power dynamics at play. First, there is a judge. Now, judges have power, and like people in power, they can be bought out. And so there's this person in power, a judge, and he's probably been bought out by the landlords and the corporations of his day. But then there's this widow, and she has nothing. And we know that because widows, because they didn't have husbands in this time, would have been poor and were essentially relying on the generosity of other people. And so the widow has had a ruling against her. We don't know what. That's not important to the story, it seems. And the widow goes to the judge and says, "Give me justice." The judge just dismisses her. And he goes the next day, "Give me justice." And the judge dismisses her. "Give me justice," and the judge dismisses her. "Give me justice," and the judge dismisses her. "Give me justice," and the judge dismisses her. And finally, it just becomes too much for the judge, even this person who is in power, and he says, "Fine. I'll give you your justice." In the story of Jacob and Esau, Esau goes from being a man who is angry to a man who is forgiving. And Jacob goes from a man who is thieving to the father of what becomes the Jewish people. And this judge goes from a hard-hearted, corrupt person to someone, at the very least, willing to give this woman justice. And this woman becomes a powerhouse individual in this story for her persistence. So in your lives, how is God changing and transforming you? Are you becoming more loving? Are you working towards justice? Is your heart open to compassion? Because I think God is changing and transforming this world. He's changing and transforming this church. When I first came to Chemainus United Church, I was told that there are certain things here that would never change. And some of them have. So may God change us. May God mold us, move us, melt us, change us. May it be so.